Hey folks, this is Asus back again with another Baldur's Gate 3 exploration video. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name's Asus, and I do high-level analytical content on the tactics and optimization of CRPGs, but in particular Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is kind of my specialty. I covered early access extensively, and in this series I'm just talking about some interesting, mostly item interactions that I have discovered in my first playthrough of the game. I'm actually very close to finishing my first playthrough. I'll probably continue this series into my second one as well. Anyways, in this video, I want to talk about two things. The first are a couple of Necromancy themed items that you can find in Act 3 that are looking really interesting. Again, I'm sharing these with you because I haven't had a chance to test them as much as I'd like, and I'm hoping you will test them and let me know your thoughts in the comments. After that, I want to open up a discussion on the hardcore rule set that I'm going to be assuming for my tier list videos. I am also very close to making my first tier list, my race tier list. I'll probably release it around sometime next week. Tier lists are what I'm known for, but to make them with any kind of objectivity, I have to assume some things about the way we play. Those assumptions I call my hardcore rule set. I want to discuss them with you all, so that's probably going to be interesting to mostly long-time listeners. For you new people, I won't be offended if you just skip that part of the video. Okay, let's talk about the Necromancy items in Act 3. Okay, there's a few. The first one I want to talk about is this staff, the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. I don't want to give any spoilers about where you can locate it, but let's just say if you do the Help the Artist questline that begins in Act 1 when you potentially free an artist from the Zentarum, that quest continues in Act 3. If you complete it into Act 3, you will encounter this staff. It is a +2 quarterstaff, which deals an extra 1d4 necrotic damage on hit. Of course, that doesn't matter because we're never going to use it to actually make attacks. This is a spell staff. So let's look at its spell abilities. There are two: Heightened Necromancy and Life Essence Harvest. That one's hard for me to say. Alright, we're going to start with Life Essence Harvest. When the wielder kills a hostile creature with the spell, they greedily absorb its energy and gain Life Essence until their next long rest. Life Essence. The affected entity has absorbed a creature's essence. It can use that essence to cast any necromancy spell without consuming a spell slot. Okay, so this is actually incredible. Effectively, what this is doing is jailbreaking necromancy spells from the normal spell slot economy of caster classes. And there's a lot of caster classes that can benefit from this. Wizards, clerics, druids, the staff works on all of them. Now, I've been running this on my sorcerer, actually. It's another class it works for. And I have racked up enough kills on my sorcerer in the short time I've been using it that I have enough stored up life essence that I can pretty much spam a necromancy spell every turn and I will never run out. So that's what I mean by jailbreaking the necromancy spells. It's as if they don't have a spell slot cost. And that could turn even like B-tier necromancy spells into something really attractive to cast because you're not using a resource to cast them except for your action economy resource. So that is incredible. Life Essence Harvest, we'll talk more about it, but there's also Heightened Necromancy that this gives you. So with Heightened Necromancy, creatures have disadvantage on saving throws against your necromancy spells. Okay, so not only are your necromancy spells costing basically nothing as far as spell slots go, they're also buffed so that targets have disadvantage on the saving throws. Awesome. This incentivizes necromancy spells so heavily. And so let's take a look at some spells that you can cast with this. This is on a wizard build I have with Gale. I tried to collect as many of the wizard necromancy spells as I could see. A few standout candidates: Blight and Circle of Death. These are both concentration-free, spammable AoE damage spells. Again, in a standard build, the damage isn't anything to write home about, but with this staff, now that you can really just start spamming them, they're starting to look really attractive. AoE damage is always useful, right? But then the other one I want to talk about is Eye Bite. This is what I've been using it for with my sorcerer. Eye Bite is a control spell, It has a few effects, but the one I always use it for is to put targets asleep. So as an action, you could put a single target asleep. Sleeping is an incredible condition because an attack made in melee range against a sleeping target is automatically hits and automatically is converted into a crit. So while it's a kind of crowd control effect, it functions more like a massive damage buff for your strikers. And especially if you have great weapon master strikers, they can use that crit to proc another attack they can make as a bonus action. So really, really good. And iBite can do this every round for 100 turns or for as long as you maintain concentration. When you're casting it with the staff that we just talked about, targets have disadvantage on that saving throw, so you're hitting it very reliably, and you can spam it even more than usual. I mean, it's already a spell that's meant to be spammed, but now I can cast iBite and then maybe later cast Wall of Fire for reasons that we'll talk about in a bit with a different item, and then I can go back to iBite. It doesn't matter because the iBite is free from a spell slot perspective. And what it does for, in particular, a class like a Sorcerer. See, Sorcerers want to have efficient actions that they can do on their turn that don't cost their spell slots. Why? Well, if they're not dependent on using a spell slot every turn, they can convert those spell slots into sorcery points, which they can use to fuel their Nova spell combos that we've talked about in the past, like casting multiple fireballs in a round, twinned haste. If you're actually not very reliant on using your spell slots, that allows you to use them for those really, really busted combos. Spamming iBite with this Necromancy staff is one way to kind of save on spell slots. It's actually been really, really good for that. So this spell is incredible, and that's just with Wizards and Sorcerers. I have a Druid here as well, which we're going to talk about a bit later. Druids get Contagion, a spell that's maybe not that good, but I find it really fun to cast, especially when targets have disadvantage on the saving throws for it. Basically, if you fail enough saving throws with Contagion, you apply effectively an insta-kill effect on the target. Super, super fun. And also clerics as well have necromancy spells. Think of even just upcasted Inflict Wounds. It's a high damage melee spell that is useful to cast, but maybe not always worth the spell slot. Well, if you have infinity spell slots to cast it with, it's like a cantrip now, and it's a really, really, really good cantrip. Yeah, lots of classes can benefit from the staff, and here's the thing. Life essences are so easy to get in my experience that you can actually just pass the staff around. So just as an example, if we go back to my sorcerer, you can see my sorcerer has collected 9 life essence, and I am not even that deep into my long rest. I haven't taken a short rest yet. You see I've barely used any spells. So I have 9 life essence. That's going to be enough for me casting iBite to last a while. So I could just pass the staff on to a different target. I still have the life essence. I can use it to cast iBite whether I've equipped the staff or not. So you can cycle this staff through to all of the spellcasters in your party, jailbreaking all of their necromancy spells. This is the kind of weapon you can make an entire team composition around. I'm so excited to play with it more. But I have gushed about it enough. There's other items we want to talk about as well. One of them is this Circle of Bones, which you get in Act 2. This occupies the helmet slot, of course, and it gives you Undead Ward. Allied undead within 6 meter are resistant to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. And on top of that, it gives you a level 3 version of Animate Dead to cast per long rest, if you'd like. Which we do like. Awesome. So, yeah, this is another aura for undead summons. And it's making the undead summon comp look really attractive to me because you can stack so many potent auras on them. One of them is this, making them tankier. Another aura actually comes from the Necromancer subclass of the Wizard, that is Undead Thrall's Better Summons, which allows you to, whenever you summon an undead character with the Animate Dead spell, I don't think it works with the Create Undead spell, just with the Animate Dead, but that's still fine. When you summon with the Animate Dead spell, they get to add your wizard level to their hit points, so around 11 or 12, depending on your build. And they will add your proficiency bonus to their damage whenever they hit. Awesome. Big damage buff for them, and a little bit of a durability buff. And then you've got Undead Ward, which is giving them even more of a durability buff. And then if you have an Oathbreaker in your composition, which you totally should, their Aura of Hate gives them even more damage on their attacks. And then I believe there's an Aura of the Crusader, something like that the spell's called, which gives them even more damage on their attacks. And then with the staff, you can totally keep your summons topped up after every encounter. Again, I haven't tested it, but it really seems good to me. So please try it and let me know what you think in the comments. Alright, so that's Circle of Bones. Next item I want to talk about is this piece of armor, the armor of the Spore Keeper. This works pretty much exclusively for Spore Druids. The thing that makes it good is a Spore Druid exclusive, and it's so good, especially with that zombie summon comp that we've been discussing. So this armor gives you two things. First is Malefic Fungi. The wearer gains a +1 bonus to spell save DC, and when dealing necrotic damage, they deal an additional 1 necrotic damage. Okay, that's nice, but not really game-changing. The game-changing one is this, Spore Sacs. While imbued with Symbiotic Entity, you can spread Bibberbang Spores, Timask Spores, and Haste Spores. Now, I want to show you how this works. I'm just going to go over here. Enter turn-based mode. So I have used my Symbiotic Entity earlier, and here are the Spore actions that I can do. I believe this is the normal one. And then these three are the ones unlocked whenever you're wearing this armor. Now, the one I want to talk to you about is Haste Spores. I'll show you how it works. Okay, so as a bonus action, you're going to summon a little cloud of Haste Spores. And everyone in that cloud, I think allies and enemies alike, are hasted.
All's well that ends. Oh,
you can see I have the Haste Spore buff right here.
Catch a break.
Now you see if I leave the cloud, end my turn, watch what happens. Alright, the haste is gone, but I am not lethargic. In every other haste effect in the game, whenever you lose the effect, you gain the lethargic condition, which is kind of like a stun. You'll lose a turn. This is a haste effect that doesn't have the lethargic debuff. It's also AoE, and you can walk in and out of the cloud to go and refresh it. Now, the cloud doesn't last that long, and my understanding is that it's once per long rest that you get this. However, it's so good because it's really the only unlimited haste effect in the game. What I mean by an unlimited effect is one that you can spread to multiple targets, as many targets as you can fit in the AoE. Haste is usually a single target spell. If you're running a sorcerer, you can twin it to get 2 targets, and that's already one of the better buffs in the game. Haste Spores could potentially give this to every single character in your party, including the summons. So now all of those zombies that we've summoned, that are getting all of those buffs that we just talked about, can also be hasted once per long rest. The damage will be absolutely overwhelming if I'm doing the math right in my head, but again, I haven't tested it, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I mean, this piece of armor of the Spore Keeper, really elevates the Spore Druid in my mind, making it one of the better support classes in the game once you get this. So, amazing. And last thing I want to talk about for armor, for items, is the Hat of Fire Acuity. So one thing I've learned in the last few days is that Arcane Acuity, this condition right here, is really valuable. Arcane Acuity adds +1 bonus to your spell attack rolls and your DC. The DC is really the important one, and it stacks. Really good control builds are builds that can use some of the items that give you Arcane Acuity effectively to stack up an overwhelming amount of spell DC. And one of them is the helmet that we talked about last video. Guys, if you haven't watched my last video, I recommend watching it. I talked about an Abjuration Wizard build that I believe is really, really good. And even some of the people who've been testing it have said that it's quite good, and barely anyone's watched that video. So check that video out and maybe impress your friends on the multiplayer with it. Anyways, The Hat of Fire Acuity is another way to get Arcane Acuity. So with this hat, whenever you deal fire damage, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns. And the 2 best spells to synergize this with are Wall of Fire and Scorching Ray, because both of them hit multiple targets with fire damage. Now, I will say, I think the item might be bugged because sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't, and I haven't looked closely enough at what the situations are when it doesn't. Either way, I'm sure that bug will get fixed eventually. When it works, this is so good for any controller in your party. You can just start stacking up very quickly your spell DC and then land a hold monster on that boss and just completely burst them down with your strikers. It's overwhelmingly powerful. So again, Wall of Fire. Wall of Fire is an AoE fire effect, which actually persists so that you can shove targets back into it. And Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray just shoots several rays of fire damage, and it will give you Arcane Acuity for each individual ray that hits, so you can upcast for like multiple rays. Let's say you're casting 6 rays, you hit them all. That's going to be plus 12 to your spell DC on the spell you cast next turn. Unbelievable. On a sorcerer, you can do this all in one turn, where you cast a Scorching Ray, and then you quicken spell as a bonus action to cast your spell DC. So good. I just used this to defeat a certain boss. Let's say I kept hope alive against this boss. If you know, you know. Anyways, there's several acuity items in the game, Arcane Acuity items in the game. All of them are really good. You should definitely prioritize them. Also, just interesting note, the Hat of Fire Acuity is so good, it makes me rethink some of the cleric subclasses. I mean, not exactly rethink, but take the Light Cleric, for example. It's a cleric that gets Scorching Ray and Wall of Fire in its spell list, and that just makes it a little better than other clerics because of the amazing interaction with this item. And it's also starting to split caster builds in my mind, where you have high damage blasting builds that focus on cold and lightning damage, and then you have strong controlling builds, which usually focus on fire damage spells, and then the like paralyzing spells like Hold Person and Hold Monster. So that is Hat of Fire Acuity, and that's all of the items that I wanted to discuss. Okay, so that was the Necromancy items. I really hope you enjoyed that. I find those items really fascinating. I'm definitely planning a full Necromancy themed party in the future. Now let's talk about hardcore rules, or the rule assumptions I'm going to be making for my tier list. So here's the gist. I'll keep this short. I love making tier lists. My audience love tier lists. I think tier lists are a super fun part of the gaming community. However, the truth is that in order to make a tier list with any kind of objectivity, I have to make certain fundamental assumptions about the way the game is going to be played. So as a quick example, the one I always give is with reloads. This game allows you to save and reload anytime you want. So theoretically, you can save and reload before every single attack roll, every single skill check, so that you always hit every attack and you crit, you always roll maximum damage, you always pass every skill check, enemies always miss you. That is allowed in the game. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. But I have to assume that you're not doing that to make a tier list, because if you do that, any tactical decision in the game is dissolved. Doesn't matter what decision you make, it's always a success. So I have to assume that there are certain self-imposed restrictions that you and I are going to put on ourselves as we play through Baldur's Gate in order to make my tier list. But I also think hardcore rule sets are just really fun. The Play It Hardcore rule set from the original Baldur's Gate game was something I followed for so many runs. I got hundreds of more hours of fun out of those games because I followed those rules. Another great example, I think, is the Nuzlocke rule set for the Pokemon games. It's great because Pokemon games are pretty easy, right? They're meant for kids. But when you impose this rule set on the games, it becomes really fun and tactically interesting. I think Nuzlocke Pokemon is a really interesting tactical game. And that's the kind of thing I want for Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously not on your first run or maybe even in your first 5 runs, but eventually, if you follow these rules, the rules I'm going to be assuming for my tier list, you should have a more challenging experience to get even more fun out of the game. So what I'm going to be suggesting for you now to discuss is my hardcore rule set. It will be 4 rules and 2 optional clauses. We can go through them now. Rule number 1 is Tactician difficulty. Of course, if this is going to be hardcore rules, you should be playing on the hardest difficulty. That seems very straightforward to me. Second, I'm going to be assuming no reloads. For the reasons that I just talked about in my example earlier, reloads trivialize tactics. Also, as an aside, reloads also trivialize the story. There's way more at stake if when Gale dies, he actually dies and you can't use him in your run. I think that's makes for a way more interesting narrative. So no reloads is rule number 2. Rule number 3, limited long rests. Now, I haven't actually set the limit at this point. What I'm going to be trying on my next run is 5 long rests per act. Now, I just pulled that number out of nowhere. I have no idea if it's going to be difficult, like maybe too difficult to impossible, or if it could be really easy. I just don't know. But I'm going to try 5 to start, and then I'm going to kind of fine-tune that dial to get it to an interesting challenge rating. But I think a long rest per act structure is best. Rule number 4, and this one might be controversial, is no respecs. I think respecking being so easy in this game eliminates a lot of the interesting opportunity cost choices that you make in a build, and I'm not for that. However, the no respec rule isn't actually no respecs at all. I think you should be allowed to respec your companions once as soon as you get them, or as soon as you first get the ability to do it. So for example, if I recruit Shadowheart right out of the Nautiloid, as soon as I get Withers in my camp, I can respec her, say, into a different subclass of Cleric, because maybe I don't like Trickery Cleric and I want to try Tempest Cleric. I think that should be allowed because it allows for interesting team compositions. It doesn't restrict you quite so much. However, if you limit it to just once when you first get the companion, it stops you from, respecking at level 7 to bypass some opportunity cost. So that is the no respec rule. You can respec companions once when you first recruit them. Now on to the optional rule clauses. First one is the lore respec clause. With this clause, if you're playing with it, you can respec for lore reasons. I don't really care what the lore reasons are. That's for you to decide. If you feel like it fits the story, you should be able to respec. Again, another classic example. Some spoilers here, guys. Shadowheart gets an opportunity in her story to change deities. And I think if you change your deity, you should be able to change your subclass, so respec should be allowed for that. That's just one example. It can be anything that you can think of, like say, if you made a deal with a Mind Flayer or with a demon, that should allow you to maybe respec to take Warlock levels. Completely up to you. That is the lore respec clause. And then the last optional clause is the no stealth clause. This rule means that you cannot hide while in combat. You can hide outside of combat, say to pickpocket someone or to sneak past an encounter, but once initiative is rolled, you cannot take the hide action. Now, one thing I'm willing to consider with this rule is that classes that are able to hide as a bonus action as part of their class identity should be able to keep doing that. So for example, rogues can hide as a bonus action. I think that should be allowed because we don't want to steal from what makes the class unique. And I think if we have the no stealth clause, it actually makes them more unique. The problem is that stealth archery is so good as a strategy in this game that it completely bulldozes all other strategies. And so if we're making optimization content or just trying to play the game as well as we can, there's really no reason not to do it, and I don't like that. It limits creativity, it limits option. That is my tentative hardcore rule set. Again, it's 4 rules, which are Tactician difficulty, no reloads, limited long rests, and no respecs, and then 2 optional clauses, the lore respec clause, and the no stealth clause. I will be writing all of these rules down on my website and also on my subreddit as a reference sheet. I'll link both of those links in the comments and you can refer to them there. I will also be updating the rules in those links, so if you're watching this video a year from now and you want to know where we are on the hardcore rule set, click on those links. Everything will be updated. I'm suggesting them now because I will soon get into making my tier list and I want to know you guys' thoughts on these optional rules. 2 videos ago, I suggested a no consumables rule. I heard from the community and it seemed pretty unanimous that you guys feel that consumables make the game more fun and you want me to consider them in my tier lists. After playing more hours of the game, I agree. I think the consumables are actually an interesting part of the tactics of the game. All that is to say, I want to hear from you, and I will take your thoughts into consideration. Anyways, I've talked long enough about this. Thanks for listening, you guys. I'll catch you next time.